Welcome to the Grid Podcast, episode 11. Our goal is to educate and to bring hard-hitting truths about America's critical infrastructure. I'm your host, Maria Sumnicht. Political opinions expressed in the podcast by participants are their opinion and not necessarily that of the Grid Podcast. Please hit the subscribe and notification bell so that you can be notified when we go live. And definitely like the video as it helps promote the channel by YouTube. So our topic today is how discovery and science are all wrapped together in that human burrito we call the great human experience. The Grid Podcast is honored to, and we welcome Glenn Rhoades, the Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. Welcome, Glenn, to the podcast, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Maria. It is really my honor and pleasure, and I humbly come before you to say that I am so honored to be on this podcast because it's all about what keeps us alive, and it's curious. I mean, I'm really curious to. I'm sure most people are curious about the title, but it's very important to understand that I lead an organization of about 65 to 70 utility power company engineers, utility workers, linemen, housewives, everything that you can imagine. And they all come together in the effort to try to warn and advocate for grid security, more importantly, power security. And so, as you mentioned, I lead this organization that was founded by my past mentor and former friend, Peter V. Pry, who unfortunately passed in 2022 from a kidney illness. And so Peter Pry was a very unique individual, and he was very important for the United States government because he had experiences in of course, military history from different California universities, and then he went and picked up his position with being a weapons of mass destruction expert for the Civil Central Intelligence Agency at Langley, and he was the chief of staff of the House Armed Services Committee under former Representative Kurt Weldon. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but later. But this podcast, Maria, is going to be broken up into three parts. Part number one is basically going to be from 2000, or I should say 1954, when I was born, to 2011. And then the second podcast, which we'll do later on, probably in February timeframe, is 2011 to 2020. And then after that, there'll be another podcast from 2020 to the present. So that's kind of what we've broken it down into. And I really felt like the reason that I talk about this human burrito of experience, and it's kind of a cliche here, is because I think that as you were mentioning, all of human endeavors, innovation, education, science, is wrapped up in the experiences of life. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite books is this book right here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's called Sun Kings. It's by an astronomer named Stuart Clark, who's with the Royal Astronomical Society. But he wrote this book called Sun Kings: The Unexpected Tragedy of Richard Carrington and the Tale of How Modern Astronomy Began. And as I read this book, it's just very, very clear and evident that sometimes human discovery happens by accident. It's not by purpose. It's just like you're pursuing one truth or trying to discover what makes one thing happen, and then something else completely, changes your course and direction in life. And so I thought, with that said, that it would be important for you guys to know who I am. Not very many people know, unless you're my relative, about where I came from and all the things that make me tick, what motivates me, And I thought it was really going to be important for you to hear that. So again, this first podcast is just going to be on who I am and what motivates and drives me. So my mother, um, Maria Elia Gutierrez, grew up in South Texas. She grew up in Harlingen, Texas. She was born in Raymonsville, um, and 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 she was one of 10 children in her family. Well, being the oldest, she was the oldest of the 10. She was quite ready to leave the roost and to go her own way because she had a lot of responsibilities. So she ended up joining the Air Force. She was part of the 11,000th Logistical Squadron stationed at the Pentagon. And it was there that she met her first husband, Warren Rhoades, who was from Lakeview, Ohio. And they actually had a great relationship until come to find out there were some financial difficulties, and Warren Rhoades said, "Marie, I can't have this anymore." And it's kind of interesting how that happened, but basically there was a divorce. I was not born yet, but there was a divorce. She went back to live with her mother and father in Harlingen, Texas. She lived in a little trailer, and then she married my biological father. His name was Bielda Silva, and when they got married, they we all well I wasn't born yet, but we moved to she moved to Houston, Texas, and it wasn't until she got pregnant with me that things started to unravel with that relationship as well. And Maria, it's kind of it's kind of crazy, but my grandfather ended up kidnapping me and her because now she was pregnant with me, and basically stole her back and took her back to Harlingen, Texas. And Maria was shocked. She said, "Why? Why are you taking me?" She said, "Well, he already has a family." So and 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 my grandfather looked at my biological father and said, "If you come back looking for Glennie and Maria, I'm going to turn you in for polygamy," because he had a whole family back in Harlingen. So we
Wow.
went back to Harlingen, Texas, and my grandfather got a little trailer, and we were living right next to my grandfather and grandmother. And it wasn't until later on that one of her service mates, a woman who was in the Air Force as well, asked her to come to Fort Morgan, Colorado. She said, "Glennie," or she said, "Maria, why don't you come up to Fort Morgan because it'll be a fresh start, and you can just hang out here and grow up, bring your child up in Colorado." So that's where we did, and she was a bookkeeper. So after 1 or 2 years in Fort Morgan, we moved to a place called Sterling, Colorado, which is in the northeastern plains. It's
Hmm.
right along the South Platte River. It follows now I-76, which splits off from Interstate 80 and goes down to Denver. And Sterling was a great place to grow up, mostly an Italian, Russian, German community. And she worked as a bookkeeper in St. Benedict's Hospital. It was a local Catholic hospital there. And so one day, this farmer and rancher came in and said, "I'm looking for somebody to take care of me. Maria, I just had uh, my third heart attack, I think, or second heart attack, and I have a ranching and farming operation." And so he asked everybody in the office there at St. Benedict Hospital if anybody would take him up on the offer. And my mother said, "Yeah, I'll apply for the job." So we ended up living with a gentleman named John Nicholas, who was a rancher farmer, very, very well to do, by the way. But he basically became my uncle. And so he would take me out on the ranching operations. We did branding, uh, uh, rounding up stray calves and cows. He would always buy a brand new Jeep Wagoneer and a brand new Newport Chrysler every year. Um, and he was such a kind man. And he also uh, paid for my education. I mean, he we put us through. There was a parochial school there in Sterling, and so I went to be educated by the nuns. And a lot of these sisters were, I can't remember the order, they were based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. But a lot of these nuns had come from communist China. And they had a background of being in concentration camps in China. They would show us pictures of them, and what the struggles they had to go through. It was unbelievable. And these pictures were probably not appropriate for little kids, but they showed it to us anyway to say this is what communism does to people, and this is how we were treated in these concentration camps. But it gave me a good foundation, I think, in life. But it wasn't until I started dating a gal uh, who was in study hall. I thought she was cute, and we went out. And she asked me one day, she said, "Glenn, are you a Christian?" And I said, "Of course I am. I sing at the 11 o'clock folk mass." But Maria, I don't think I really understood what Christianity was all about, but it did floor me. It was like I've never had anybody ask me that question, and quite frankly, at that point in time, I was starting uh, to steer away from my tradition. The tradition of who Jesus was and everything, and I just thought maybe it's all a big joke. But this gal had a tremendous influence on my life, and I knew that she had a very strong conviction to her Savior, Jesus Christ. And again, I lead an organization that's made up of a lot of different paths and faith legacies. So I'm not saying that any of this has any reflection on our organization, but it is kind of interesting how um, that that was a foundation for what made me who I am. And there was a eureka moment that came in my life when I was approached and said, I have to make a decision whether this is just a bunch of made up stuff that I'd learned in catechism when I was a little kid, or I really needed to have a faith moment on, is Jesus really who he says he is? And I decided to follow Christ. That was in June of 1973 when I was 18. So after that, um, I started my little faith journey. I started, reading the Bible, and I started understanding that the Christian faith is so important for me and my own understanding of how life happens. And then I had another eureka moment when I was 19 years old. I had an opportunity to travel to Caracas, Venezuela. And it was at that moment in time, and I'd always been interested, Maria, in drawing. I was fascinated with drawing. I don't know what it was. I loved to just pencil things out. So I would draw a little aircraft, because I was kind of into airplanes and everything, and draw airplanes. Not only that, I would draw like airports. Like if you're looking down at the airport and you
Yeah.
see all the runways, I would draw the little runways. And then I would draw how the cars would come in and drop off people and then pull away. So I was drawing highways in there. So I kind of had I kind of had inklings to civil engineering
Hmm.
in my thought. And then I was fascinated with space travel too. And when I was in high school, I joined the Civil Air Patrol, and we met at the American Legion down in the basement. And we would get these films from Maxwell Air Force Base. These films, they would come in and we'd show the films. And I remember looking at Titan missile launches and astronautics and how to gauge weather and VORs, for navigating small planes. I never got my pilot's license, but I was fascinated with the Civil Air Patrol, and you would find me. I think it was on Wednesday nights, marching around in the parking lot with a bunch with my other cadets, right? So we weren't in the Boy Scouts; we were in the Civil Air Patrol, and so it was kind of a nice little, you
Hmm.
know, avenue of what makes me tick. So I had that thing. But what happened is I thought, well, maybe I'd get into avionics or aviation. Maybe I'd be an astronomer someday, and I was always conflicted about what I was going to do. And my mother said she always would blow me out of the water. She'd say, "Why don't you do all of them? Like you can be an astronomer and you can be a pilot, or you can be an astronomer and you can be an engineer." And so she always opened that door and left that door open for my human curiosity. when I went to Caracas, Venezuela, the thing that really shocked me was the opulence and the extreme luxury of the good part of Caracas. But then just a few blocks away, you would see the Los Barrios, the neighborhoods,
Yeah.
and basically shanty towns. And Maria, have you ever been to Caracas?
No, but I have family who lives in Venezuela still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and basically, if you can imagine, people would just be living in these shanty towns, and they
Mhm.
would be throwing their garbage on everybody else's roof until it got all the way down to the bottom, and that had a profound effect on me. And I liken it to kind of like um, going, let's say you went to the Bellagio Hotel, and I think some people maybe on the podcast have visited Las Vegas. It would be like going to the Bellagio, and then instead of going out the front door of the Bellagio, seeing that beautiful Bellagio fountain, right,
Mhm.
you would see a massive landfill with people living there, and it would be garbage. That is the kind of uh, difference and disparity is from the haves and the have nots. So at that point in time in my life, I thought, I'm going to be an urban architect. I'm going to be an urban planner. I don't know why. I just said, I'm going to try to have some influence in sustainable habitat. Okay. So I went back. I got a scholarship in tennis from at a junior college. So I played on the junior college team, but I was interested in science, so I had a double A degree in science, and then I got a scholarship to the University of Colorado. And I probably would have went to CSU because CSU was more agrarian. It was where a lot of people in northeastern Colorado would go to follow up with at a state university the agrarian portion of their experience and their background. But I had this opportunity to go to the University of Colorado, and I studied environmental design, which is kind of a unique program. So, Maria, it used to be that prior to when I got there, like 4 or 5 years prior to that, they were spitting out traditional architects. You'd have a 5 year degree, and then you would become an architect, right? But they realized that a lot of people that were coming in and had creativity and wanting to influence their environment were not all cut out to be architects, right? So that
Right.
was kind of an interesting thing. So the five tracks that they have were traditional architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning, product design, and interior design. So they would give you a 4 year degree, and then you'd go to a graduate degree in whatever your specialty was.
Mhm.
So I kind of focused in on urban design and urban sustainability, and so I got this degree, and then I went to try to find my first job. Well, it turned out that my first job was working at a dude ranch in in the mountains. So I was a ranch hand. So I would, and because I had ability of fixing fences, and with my background in agriculture, fix fences. I knew how to paint. I knew how to take care, mow lawns, all that stuff. So I became a ranch hand at the Sea Lazy U Dude Ranch in Granby, and one day, there was a guy that came in and beat up jalopy, and this was kind of an expensive place. So they said, be kind to people, but tell them it's really kind of expensive to be here. So he pulled in and he said, "Hi, can you show me around?" And I said, "Of course." So I showed him around, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I go, "Well, I'm just mowing the lawn." And he said, "Well, no, I mean, what are you doing here? I mean, like, are you looking for, what's your future?" And I go, "Well, I'd like to get into urban planning, but I'm trying to find my first job." And he said, and this is what he said, his name was Thomas Crawford. He was a director of Martin Marietta. So I had known Martin Marietta from my previous looking at films, down at
Mhm.
the basement of the American Legion. And I said, Martin Marietta, that's kind of interesting. He goes, "Yeah, have you ever thought about being an aerospace planner?" And I said, "A what?" He said, "An aerospace planner." And I go, "I have no idea what that is." And he said, "Well, when you get a contract, these rocket engineers and rocket scientists need people to help them look and gauge and basically report on cost and schedule variances. So I think you would be good at that. And why don't you? Here's my card. Come and look for me." And so lo and behold, I went and talked to him, and I got a job. as being an aerospace planner, this was in 1986 for Martin Marietta. So I was on the Barstow heliostat program,
Mhm.
and I was right across the hallway from the Millstar program, which you had worked on,
Work
I'm
on.
sure, or been
Hmm.
nice. Yeah. So
Yep.
Martin Marietta was in my background and everything, and so as you may or may not know, at least in at Martin Marietta, the first year is just you're kind of camped out at the copy machine. You're kind of a gopher. You know, they want to see what makes you tick. They want to make sure that you show up on time, that you're engaged, that you truly want to help. So I was parked at the copy machine for the first year, and all I would do is just spit out proposals and cap sheets. You know, it's just
Oh,
over and over again. And so after a year, and it was a good job, you know. I mean, it was a high paying job at the time. But after a year, I told my mother, I said, I'm quitting my job. She said, You're what? I said, I'm going to quit my job. And she said, Why? I just spent all this money to get you through school, and now you're going to throw it away. And it's so funny because when I went and told my boss that I was going to quit, everybody around me said, This is a bad decision. You've got a nice job here
yeah.
and you are throwing it away. And I can't even believe, what are you going to do? And I said, Well, I've always wanted to live in Europe. So I'm going to go to Europe and live for 3 years or whatever. And they said, That is really stupid. And I said, Well, I'm sorry, because I've always wanted to learn Spanish, and in learning Spanish and the few courses that I had at the University of Colorado, it just didn't cut it. You know, it really didn't cut it. So I wanted to immerse myself in the Spanish language. So that's what I did. I quit my job. I went to Spain, and I worked there for 3 years. And then, well, I was actually 2.5 years for one job, and then I went to study at L'Abri, which is a Christian philosophical camp, or it's kind of I don't want to say it. It's almost like a farmhouse, and it had lectures by Francis Schaeffer, who was a theologian, and he taught me a lot about. And it wasn't him, but all the literature was there. It was all about sustainability and Christian responsibility to sustain human habitat. So I came back, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I picked up a job with one of my friends that was at the time selling Apple computers. So I would sell Apple ones and Apple twos to all the local ranchers, and we had that software. What was it called? Great Plains software. Have you ever heard of that? It
No.
was. It's basically a Apple program that just manages ranching operations. So I would be out there, going out to the ranch houses and giving them little demos on how to help with managing their farm operations. So after about 5 months of selling computers, and that's when the Lisa came out, the Macintosh came out. In
Right.
fact, I was at the Gates Planetarium when the first Macintosh came out. We had a big giant shindig with Thorson Rocky Mountain, which were the dealers for the Apple uh, distribution for here, the Rocky Mountain area, and and it was everything was going good. I really loved the Macintosh. It was a little computer, and I had a great deal. They gave us a package where you get a Mac and a printer and everything, and it was, the whole computer stuff was just exploding. PCs. We sold Apples. We sold Compaqs. We sold Columbia. All these IBM knockoffs, Crapos. We sold all those computers. And one day I was at the Burger King there in Sterling, and I was just having lunch, and my old boss from Martin Marietta walked in, and I go, "What are you doing here?" He said, "It looks like you came back from Spain," and I said, "Yeah, I did." He said, "Well, good. I'm glad you're back from Spain." And I said, "Well, what are you doing here? Why are you here?" He said, "Well, my daughter is here studying at Northeastern Junior College, and it's a really good university, and that's where I had that first athletic scholarship, Maria, to play tennis for the Plainsmen." And he said, "Yeah, we're just here doing that." And then he said, "Hey, by the way, you want your old job back?" And I said, "Here, give me 3 seconds. Yes, I'll take it." So
Yeah, job back.
yeah,
So you
so
went
I
back
moved.
to,
Yes, I moved back and I didn't miss a beat. I mean, it's just like boom, I'm
yeah.
right back to where I was before. It was kind of interesting, and so it started my long journey in operations. And I did some project management stuff. I did some planning, and because of my architectural background, I actually was camped out quite a bit of time on the first. Computer layout programs, that were had because we
Hmm.
had just acquired Martin Marietta had just acquired General Dynamics, so we had to move the Atlas Centaur and the Atlas program from San Diego to Martin Marietta. And at the time, Martin Marietta got a good deal from because, as you know, the John Mansville building, which is this incredible office building outside of Denver. Have you ever seen it, Maria?
I'm sure I have. Just driving,
Oh my gosh, it's
it's,
the Empire State Building laying on its side, and it's just
oh yeah, yeah.
absolutely
Yeah,
gorgeous,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's a big building. Yeah. I
So
was wondering what that was.
we bought that and acquired it from John Mansville, which was experiencing bankruptcy at the time because of the asbestos programs and all the things that went south. And we had to quote unquote Martinize it. It was really horrible because this beautiful building, we had to turn it into something that was like government issue, right? So we
Right.
ripped up all the directors' offices and these. I mean, I would take one of John Moundsville vice president offices, and I'd put six people in there. It was incredible, and we filled in the opulent, swimming pool, and we put offices there. So we basically Martinized that thing, right? And I'm not proud of it now because we stuffed as many people as we could into as little a space as possible. But that's what we were growing. We were
Yeah.
growing, and so for that year and a half, I was actually in a dungeon. I was like in the bowels of this office building in Waterton Canyon, just on my computer. As we moved people in, I was drawing new layouts for everybody, and I was coordinating the phones, the facilities, and everything. So that was a unique part of my Lockheed Martin experience, and it was really good. It was really fun, but it was really stressful, and we had to move that whole operations. And it wasn't just me; it was a team of about, I would say, 20, 30 people, that were
Right.
doing all the coordination, the construction, everything. So the other thing that was really neat about working at Martin Marietta is you taught and you rubbed elbows with some incredible people. I mean, I talked
Hmm.
to some space scientists that knew more about every crater on Mars than their neighbors. I'm sure they were what you would call a space geek to the max. Okay, these are like your concept of a Hungarian mad scientist, and they would. And it's interesting because these guys were so intense on designing spacecraft that they would like to live in a little hole. I mean, it's like the darker and the smaller the holes where they could concentrate, the better off they would be. It was a really interesting situation. So I worked there, worked both some non-classified, classified programs, and it wasn't until 1999 that one of my engineering friends, his name was Randy Dehoff, is a mechanical engineer. He told me, he said, "Glenn, I was wondering, have you ever thought about running for politics?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, I'm on the State Board of Education for Colorado. And I think you would make a good candidate for the State Board of Education." And I said, I don't think so. He said, "No, no, you would." And he basically talked me into running for a position at the State Board of Education. So, as you know, Maria, the Colorado Constitution says you shall have a state board representative for every congressional district. Okay,
Hmm.
unless you have six, and if you have six, then you shall have an at-large candidate. So it just happened to be that our current governor, Jared Polis, was the at-large candidate. So when the seventh congressional district came up, they asked me to basically run against Jared Polis, and I have a good relationship with him. I'm sure Jared's going to see this podcast and stuff, but he didn't want me to win because that would have put more pressure for him as an at-large candidate to just get off the board, right?
Right.
So he was not in favor of me winning, right? And and by the way, it's interesting because I grew up a strict Democrat. I'm telling you, I was if you saw my house and you walked into my living room, you would see a picture of Jackie and Jackie
JFK.
Kennedy,
Yeah.
and yeah, the Kennedys on in my living room, and so I was always about labor and pushing for kind of the more common guys because back then I don't think the Democratic Party is nearly like that, but back then most people in northeastern Colorado were Democrats, and they really were. They appreciated what John Kennedy was doing, and he was kind of their idol, so to speak. So it was kind of interesting that I ran as a Republican, um, but I was on the same ticket with Representative Bob O'Prey, who ended up winning. So as a result of that election, Bob O'Prey won by I think 82, 81 votes. Pat Hayes, who was a Republican, who was running for CU Regent, she won by 5,000 votes, and I lost by 5,000.
Mm.
So, and I found out afterwards. There's a couple of things that you learn, and you probably learned this too because you ran for political office
Hmm.
too. Um, it's the thing that you learned was that number one, uh, nobody knows who you are.
No, they
Nobody
don't.
really cares. Nobody really cares who you are. And the majority of Americans are not engaged in any
No, they're not.
issues at all. I mean, I would knock on a door and say, "Hey, my name's Glenn Rhoades. I'm running to be your representative for the 7th Congressional District," and they'd say, "We don't know who you are, and we really don't have time for you." Right? And then you would ask them, "Well, do you have any issues?" I mean, and they'd say no. And I would say that I don't know what it was like for you, but I would say that 9 out of 10 Americans have no clue about what the issues are or
No.
anything. They just read it. The other thing I learned is that no matter what you do, no matter what you say, you will be painted in complete opposite way when it comes to who you are and what
Right.
your positions are. And
Yep.
and Maria, because I had that time in Spain, learning about Spanish education, and I had some time in France and Holland. They were multilingual acquisition experts. When you were in Holland and you didn't know like 3 or 4 languages, you were pretty unique. I mean, you were like that would be unheard of. Okay, so when I came, and that was one of my positions at the State Board of Education, is that I would advocate for multilingual acquisition, not bilingual education, but multilingual acquisition. So my position was always, let's get people. First of all, not learning a second language when they're in high school. That is absolutely not the time to do it. Because as you know, in Europe, you have second language acquisition, which is important to your educational development when you're in, a 6 year old or 7 year old. That's where you're going to pick it up. So I came in as saying, I think we need to completely redo this thing. And I don't think the people that graduated from Northern Colorado University, which where's most of our teachers are educated in, they didn't like that. They didn't like that I was a rebel rouser of saying, no, we need to keep it in high school where it belongs. And I said, no, it can't be
It's
that way.
it's too
And
late in high school. It's not totally too late, but if you really want
right.
to be fluent in a language, you start at 5 or 6. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I was a big giant proponent of that. And a billionaire who lives in Fort Collins who has a medical bed named after her. She actually wrote some really bad things about me, about my language, inability to understand how to teach languages, right? And you think that I could come back and actually uh, rebut anything that she said? No, nobody ever cared. And so I was branded as an anti-lingual candidate, which is just the opposite of what I believed.
Yeah, yeah,
And so that's one thing. So you never really get the story straight because people will carve whatever they think you should be or what's helpful to their political persuasion.
yep.
And so it's the carving, the media that you have to run against. It's the inability to engage in a public that really knows what the issues are. And then the last thing, and I think this is even more nefarious, is I had some really strong and wealthy people try to give me money, and I said no, I don't want it. They said, I don't understand. You have all the actions and the issues that we have. And I said, listen, if you want to give me $1,000, that's fine, but I'm not going to take some money that you're talking about. There's no way I will do that. And they said I was stupid, and I probably am a stupid politician because I could never do that. I always felt like if I had to give get a large amount of money from a donor, that the first time that there was an issue that I had to vote for the benefit of the children of Colorado or what this political persuasion was, I would always argue for the benefit of children's education and how children have to be influenced and guided by the government, and just at least give them a chance. I didn't want to be bought. I didn't want to be bought off. So I lost. And it's also, I think this is kind of important too, that at the time, and you probably understand some of this, that Jefferson County, where I was, where I lived, we were there were a lot of charter schools that were starting to happen, and the public educational system was against charter schools big time. They didn't want it, they didn't like it, and I was a proponent of competitiveness in the school system. I think that's good. I don't think we should have a one size fits all. And so I was an advocate for school choice in education. And interestingly enough, there was a gentleman, Dr. Lloyd Carlton, who is seen as a hero in Jefferson County school systems. If you've ever heard of this man, he was an incredible guy. And I asked him one day, I said, can you give me a snapshot of what happened in education here in Jefferson County, Colorado? And he said, Glenn, I'll tell you what it is. So he said, here's my background. I was a principal at Kendrick Lake Elementary, which is just down the road from where I live, by the way. And he said at the time, there was a kind of a new movement in education, so that we weren't going to go with traditional, arithmetic, phonics, stuff like that. It was more an open system where we wouldn't have any walls. I mean, Kendrick Lake Elementary at the time didn't have any walls; they had partitions. He said it was almost impossible to teach because you could hear what was going on in the other person's classroom. He said as a principal, I was like pulling my hair out. It's like, this is crazy. And then they had this whole aptitude thing about how it wasn't just you get a report card and you're an A, B, C, or D student. You had to go through this holistic thing, and it would be like 10 or 20 minutes for every single student. And a lot of parents would just say, "Hey, wait a second. Just tell me if it's an A, B, or C student." And they say, "No, we got to go through this whole thing, right?"
Right.
So it was really, really hard. Well, as a result of that, there were the traditional educational grades or approaches were being pushed out. So there were three schools in Jefferson County that were the black sheep of education. There was a Southern Jefferson County school. There was a Northern Jefferson County school, and then there was a Jefferson County school that was in my neighborhood called Denison Elementary. And they said, we're not budging. So they closed down the North and South. Denison stayed traditional. Okay. They said, we're not budging. We're going to have this be our school. And I don't care what the school district is telling us what to do. We're going to have arithmetic, writing, penmanship, the whole 9 yards. Okay. So they were like the black sheep of the family. And then what happened get this, Maria, is there was the great toilet paper caper. So not only did we have the Jefferson County supervisor try to get Denison closed down, but then they had this scandal, Maria. And so, do you know what the scandal was?
No.
That they were using more toilet paper than any other school in the whole district. It's like,
Seriously? Yeah.
why is this?
Why
What?
does it? Why is that even an issue in education? Anyway,
Well, it
that's
was, I don't know. No, it was just a little another blurb and
yeah.
a thing, a bad mark for Denison. So what they did is they had a sting operation, and they watched as they got supplies to Denison Elementary, this fundamental education school, and they found out that the principal of Denison was going down to the flea market with all this toilet paper and selling it on the side.
Seriously?
So
I mean, was
yes,
that a true accusation? Wow. Wow.
yeah, it was true. So here he is. So Denison is a fundamental education school, and now they're the black sheep of the family because everybody wants to close them down. And then they had this other thing that was over their heads, like, oh, there's a scandal going, right? So they were prime candidate for being destroyed, right? Uh,
I got a
but they
question
said,
to
well,
ask you on that
yeah,
because
go ahead.
was he selling the toilet paper so he could get supplies because they were cutting off his funding? See what I'm saying?
I have no idea. I don't know that. I don't know the reason why he was doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Who knows?
I'm just saying that
Yeah, who knows? I just knew that that's what the that's what ended up happening. So I don't know what his motives were, but I do know that it was a kind of a little mini scandal. So so then Lord Carlton is trying to get a position at a new school,
hmm
and nobody wanted to go to Denison. Why would you anybody want to go to Denison that's going to be cut, right? But Lloyd Carlton, he prayed about it and he said, I think I'm going to go. I'm going to put my hat in the ring. He told to his wife, and he went to Denison Elementary. Okay, Dr. Lloyd Carlton went to Denison,
hmm
and every single day he was getting hounded by the superintendent of Jefferson County Schools to say, hey, we need to shut you guys down or do a new program. And then what happened is one day he got a call from the Jefferson County superintendent and said, what are you guys doing over there that's so successful? Because basically they had the highest marks of any elementary school in Jefferson County because they were doing the
They were
fundamentals, right?
teaching. They were teaching fundamentals.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, Lloyd said, "Is this the same superintendent that's trying to cut me off?" He said, "No, no, we've had a change." Do you know what the change was, Maria?
Mhm.
Former Governor Bill Owens was a representative in the House, and an educational activist named Dave Devlin had passed the charter school amendment in the Colorado House. And all of a sudden, charter schools were like legitimate, like they were going to be actually an option for people. And all of a sudden, instead of cutting them down, they thought, oh no, we need to be competitive with these charter schools. So overnight, it changed.
It changed.
And Carlton led that first group. He led that first group of Denison Elementary people because it was a traditional, arithmetic, mathematics, everything. He led them to Manning Junior High out of Golden, and then they took a model from a Jesuit high school, and they used that to create Devlin Elementary, or not Devlin Elementary, but Devlin High School, I should say,
Mhm.
and that's outside of right off of 285. And unfortunately, Dave Devlin, who was an educational activist, he passed away in a plane crash uh, in during that time, or prior to that time, right after they passed the amendment. So he was an activist, but he really, really understood education in a big way. And so obviously, Bill Owens went on from being a representative to then being the governor of Colorado. So that's kind of his legacy. Is part of that legacy was creating the charter school amendment and actually creating really a good school system and a competitive school system. So I wanted to say all that because again, we realize that part of of what we do, and part of understanding everything has got to be understanding and really getting people educated.
Mhm.
Education is a big part of this. So
Yep.
then, so then go back to where I was before, where here I was, I just lost the election. Um, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I don't have a job. So I went to Governor Bill Owens at the time he became governor, and then he had a big giant tech conference. And so I went up to the very front of the auditorium. There was about 2,000, 3,000 people there, and there were just two seats. So I took one seat, and then there was an empty one. Well, interestingly enough, a gentleman by the name of uh, let's see, what was I'm trying to think of his name right now. It skips me right now. Oh, Griff Kundal. Okay, a guy by the name of Griff Kundal had just graduated from DU. Okay, and he was an attorney. So he sat down right in the chair next to me, and I introduced myself to him. I said, "My name is Glenn Rhoades," and he said, "Well, I'm Griff Kundal," and he goes, "Glenn Rhoades? You mean like Glenn Rhoades, the guy who was running for State Board of Education?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I know all about you." I go, "You do? I lost the election, you know." He goes, "Oh, yeah, no, you did pretty good." And I said, "I lost." He said, "No, you did really good. You only lost by 5,000 votes or something like that." He said, um, "I think you might be able to help us." And I go, "Well, what do you got going?" He said, "Well, um, me and a guy by the name of Mark Modzelewski had just helped and were helping Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon to write the 21st Century Nanotechnology Development Act." And I didn't know what nanotechnology was at the time, but he said, "I think you could help us." And I go, "Well, what do I have to do?" He said, "Well, what you have to do is learn about nanotechnology first. And then what we're going to try to do is get us into the National Nanotechnology Infrastructure Network, which had seeds in the Science Office, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and also in the National Science Foundation. So they knew that nanotechnology was a step forward in keeping America competitive commercially and everything else. So they said, let's have a couple of meetings. So I ended up starting the Nanotechnology Initiative for Colorado, and I worked with Dr. Louis Horniak, who was a co-founder with me, and Dr. Richard Geyer and Dr. Ron Goldfarb, and I knew a bunch of those guys, and of course Griff Kundal. And so we all got together, and we said the way to do this is we have to brief the congressional delegation. So at the time there was Scott McGinnis down at DeGette. There were some other people. Heffley, I think, was in Colorado Springs. McGinnis, a whole bunch of people. But anyway, and one of the guys that we briefed was Senator Wayne Allard, who was on the Appropriations Committee. So I briefed them all on what we're trying to do. I learned about nanotechnology. I didn't know it from Adam. I mean, it was really cool because I got to visit, NREL. I got to visit NIST. I saw the electrospectrum microscope, the electron scanning microscopes, and it was really fascinating. I mean, they were, I got to meet Richard Smalley from Rice University. I got to meet with him and talk to him, and so it was like really, really fascinating. And they always conjectured that as we develop nanotechnology, we'll understand more about material science. So with manipulating atoms and molecules, we'll be able to create new things in the environment. So I read a couple of nano books like Eric Drexler's Engines of Creation. I read um, the guy who wrote Michael Creighton's Swarm. Have you ever heard of Swarm?
Yeah.
That was a scary book about nanobites, basically these nano little swarms of drones and stuff would basically configure to the form of your face and everything. And so I was on the very first science workshop for the ethical, the economic, and the legal ramifications of nanotechnology at the National Science Institute, or Foundation, I should say. So in order to do this, we had to get about we didn't know what school it was going to go into, but basically a lot of us assumed it was probably going to go into the biggest state school, which is University of Colorado, right? So I worked with a guy named Dr. Roop Mahajan and Dr. Y.C. Lee. They were mechanical and electrical engineers in the engineering department, and so Roop Mahajan was just the greatest guy. I mean, I got to meet with him. I think he went to the University of Virginia afterwards, or someplace back east. But he was just a great, great guy. I think he was Indian. I'm pretty sure Mahajan was an Indian American, brilliant guy. And he said, Glenn, we need to get this done. We need to have this happen. So after briefing Senator Wayne Allard said, I'd like you to go to Washington and meet with a couple of guys. And I said, okay, who do you want me to meet with? He said, well, I want you to meet with Dr. Philip Bond, who was a former VP of Hewlett Packard. So I met with Philip Bond, and Maria, talk about being impressed. I went into his office and I went, holy moly, this office is bigger than my house. He was just a deputy secretary of commerce under Evans, but it was big. And what he said is, he said, yeah, Senator Allard said you were going to come over and give me your spiel. What do you got going on? And I said, okay, here's what we want to do. We want to create a nanotechnology lab at one of the universities, and we need some money. So he looks, and he looks at it, looks at his notes and stuff, and he says, go visit this guy. So I took the business card, and it was some guy from HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And I said, you want me to talk to this guy? He said, yeah,
Huh.
go talk to that guy. And so I went to HUD. I didn't know why I was going to HUD. So he said, just tell him what you told me. So I talked to this guy at HUD, and Maria, a few months later, we got $3 million to do a nanotechnology lab at the University of Colorado.
Well,
And guess how much?
we need a energy lab,
Yeah,
a grid energy hardening lab, pretty much
yeah,
with that same amount.
yeah. Isn't that incredible? I mean, it was really kind of fascinating. I didn't fill out one piece of paperwork at all, but
Interesting.
I think it was a national initiative, Maria, that we knew was important. And certainly it had national security ramifications too, because I had some talks with some people at Langley too, and they were very, very interested in how this stuff was going to develop, and especially how it was developing in Southeast Asia, right? So that was important for them to understand. Um, there were some avenues and some projects that were on the drawing board, never came to fruition, but we ended up um, having some pretty good intelligence on what was happening in Southeast Asia, specifically in China, and their development of nanotechnology. But what's really fascinating about that is, as quickly as everybody was jumping on the nanotechnology parade bandwagon, they started jumping off it. And you know why? Because of nano pollution. I mean, the fact that you had nanoparticles that could actually go into the cell membrane and maybe even start messing with your DNA was a very disturbing concept. And if you're Revlon and you're purporting to be a nano person that say, hey, we're going to have better cosmetics, and all of a sudden you find out, hey, we might have some nanoparticles that are actually going and um, penetrating your cell membrane, they were jumping off that bandwagon quickly. So nano really, it had a heyday, but then it just went boom, like it dropped. But there's still nanotechnology development going on.
Oh yeah.
It's still important for our national security, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so that was kind of an interesting situation. So that that got me to thinking, and it comes back to where I'm at now, and we're probably going to be closing the podcast here pretty soon, but it came back to where I'm at now. So as a result of starting the nanotechnology initiative, I knew that I was always interested in how science interplays with the society and sustainable communities. And by the way, one of the guys that I studied architecture with was a guy named Spence Havlick, who's a dear friend of mine, and he was on the Boulder City Council. He was one of the premier urban architects, and he wrote a paper that I still have. In 1994, he wrote a paper about how he was basically complaining that of all the architectural schools in the United States, there was only five that dealt with things that go bump in the night that could impact human sustainability, right? So it was like floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, all the traditional stuff.
Mm,
But bless his heart, in 1994, he didn't know about what we're going to talk about later in the next podcast, the things that go bump in the night that nobody knows about, right?
right.
So he was complaining about how nobody's addressing these. And it has to do with power. It has to do with electrical energy. And by the way, if you ever get a chance to pick up Deadliest Enemy by Osterholm. He
Mm,
was on the President Trump's Science Advisory Commission on the COVID and COVID-19 and all this other stuff. In his book, Deadliest Enemies, he purports a question. Like, if I ask you a question, Maria, what public health official or scientist had the most impact on global sustainability and longevity of life? So I'm gonna give you that trivia question right now because I'm gonna tell you what Osterholm says in his book and
what
about page 25.
what government official? Like
No, what government? No, not what government. What scientist, like a scientist or activist, had the most influence on the longevity of life in human history, at least from Dr. Osterholm's perspective? Who do you think it was?
gee, the person who invented the um, penicillin.
Okay, that was one of the things. Do you know who he said?
No.
Nikola Tesla. Nikola
Oh, Nikola
Tesla.
Tesla. Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, and Osterholm makes a very, very good point that up until Nikola Tesla invented and started topping both directed energy current and alternating current, there was a glass ceiling at about 45 years of age. Nobody could bust through that. Nobody. We all lived till we were about 40, 50 years old, and then we'd kill over dead. He said the invention of electricity and power was the thing that broke the ceiling at 45 years of age. He said, when you look at when Nikola Tesla started developing and introducing electricity, we had sanitation, we had refrigeration, we had purification,
Hmm.
we had being able to cool and heat places. He said it's incredible. So he gave the top public health official globally that had the most global impact on human civilization to Nikola Tesla,
Wow.
which I think was fascinating. It really is. And
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it is, and he did a lot of work down here in Colorado Springs, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So that was pretty doggone interesting. And in light of that, looking back on Spence Havlick, and as an architecture student, you always build your dream home. Okay,
Mm.
it's just like a given. You have to build your dream home. Like, where are you going to have your swimming pool if you have one? And I didn't have a big swimming pool in my dream house, but I did have a lap pool that was like a treadmill, so I
Right.
could go out and exercise, right? And it looked over this beautiful mountain village and everything. I was just like, this is it. And guess what we did for energy? We stuck a solar panel on it. That was it. So I didn't understand energy like I understand now. It was just like this add-on thought. Of course, Maria, you're going to put a solar panel on your house because that's the ecologically friendly thing to do, right? At the time,
Yeah.
with all you know. So that was our whole narrative right there. And so we certainly didn't have any courses on sustainable uh, power. We didn't have any courses on how the electrical grid worked. We didn't have any courses on space weather and how that could affect the electrical grid. We didn't have any courses on how the electromagnetic spectrum and all the stuff we now know about it. Maria, we are at a watershed moment. right now, we are at a moment in time where we have to understand our total environment, and we don't know that right now. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, really don't. Like we're like toddlers trying to understand how we're going to sustain. And in light of Nikola Tesla and actually having sustainability of life, what are the things that are going to be important to grapple with in the next few years? And in talking to our good friend, one of the guys that I won't mention his name, but he's on DHS, he told me, Glenn, there are 16 different basically infrastructures, right? But he narrowed it down to five. Okay, the five are um, power and electricity,
Mm-hmm.
water,
Water.
and food, and how to process human waste, transportation, logistics, and what
Communications.
was the other?
Comms.
Pardon?
Telecom.
Yeah, and communications, yes.
Hmm.
And we have to understand how the electromagnetic spectrum affects all those things. So that is going to be kind of the end of this podcast, because I'm going to tell you in the next podcast how important not only are these things are, but all the threat vectors that my good friend Dr. Peter Pry wrote about incessantly about. Glenn, these are the things that could make the whole thing collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be talking about um, my next Eureka moment was the Tohoku Oki earthquake that happened on uh, March the 11th, 2011, and how it made me not be able to sleep at night when I read about it. I couldn't understand what was going on, and it bothered me. It bothered me. Why in the world did the nuclear power plant that was reliant on the bulk power system go haywire? So that was just a one of a lot of different things and questions that came up to go for my next path, in sustainability. And I think that's pretty much it. So
Well, I do
maybe
have
a
there was a
cliffhanger.
there's a couple questions in the chat. Lola
Okay.
Wash asks, "What about Congressman Guthrie? He is chair of House Energy Committee." I think this was when you were discussing, getting funding for grid hardening. I,
Huh. I don't. Well, first of all, Guthrie, I don't know who that is, so I can't comment on that. I don't know who. I don't know what state he's in. He's not in Colorado, is he? I don't think he is. But
I don't think so. He
okay,
might be at the national level.
right. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Maria, before we go on, let me make sure that everybody understands one thing, and I know you'll talk about it too. But they can always reach me at Glenn Rhoades, GLENN RHOADES at Comcast, or no, at gmail.com. And if you send me a request, I will send you three books in preparation for this next podcast. Okay, these
Okay.
are books that were recommended by Dr. Peter Pry, and I have electronic copies. He's given me permission to give those to you for free. Okay, so without question, if you understand these books, you'll understand the basics of what I'm going to say. The first one is called Power and Light by Peter Pry. The second one, and John Holloman's given me permission to do this as well. The book is called Grid Down: Death of a Nation,
Hmm.
that John Holloman did for Stephen Quast and the Joint Base San Antonio project, that talked about what are we talking about here when the worst things happen that could possibly happen actually happen. So, and then the last thing, which is a very, very looming threat, especially in light of the Ukrainian war. And as you know, we were briefed by the federal government on the rise of drone warfare.
Hmm.
It's called Blackout Wars Non Nuclear EMP. And those are things that nobody talks about, nobody understands, and for a reason. And we'll just briefly touch on that, because if people understood what that's all about, you don't want to have a lot of people know about it, especially bad guys. But
Right.
it is something in our threat awareness that we need to worry about.
Yeah. Lola says he's from Kentucky and he's a chair, but needs to be educated about the lack of resilience of the grid. So you might be someone
Okay.
you might want to reach out to. And
No.
Lola, I put Glenn's email in the chat. So email him and he'll send you PDF copies of the books.
Right. That's great.
So,
Okay.
so
Well, is there
well,
any questions that you had for me, Maria?
no, I look forward to part two. Let me see. David Moran asked, Congressman Brett Guthrie represents Kentucky's second congressional district in the U.S. House
Okay.
of Representatives. So that's who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Great. Thanks,
yeah.
David. I know him.
Um,
Second.
no, I look forward to part two. Welcome you back, and
Yeah.
continue this wonderful conversation. And I want
Yeah.
to thank you for being on here. And I'll ask one more time. Any more questions in the chat before we?
Okay.
I think we're good. I think we're good. I think people.
Okay.
So please
Well.
like and share the video and hit the notification bell so you know when part two is going to happen with Glenn Rhoades.
Yep.
Until next time, be well and have a happy holiday season. We won't be broadcasting next week. We'll be back at for our next broadcast in January on January 7th. And until then, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all of you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.